Hi everyone, welcome to Difference Frames the World, a channel to view the world from a different angle. Today we talk about the relationship between Russia and China, which is vital to global security and stability. Before starting the video, we need to discuss why Qin Gang, the former Chinese foreign minister, was removed from office suddenly after several weeks of absence from public view. Qin Gang was regarded as a close follower of Chinese President Xi Jinping, and his promotion to the post, becoming China's youngest foreign minister, had been a big surprise to the world. He was the first Chinese diplomat referred to as a wolf warrior, and his performance as the ambassador to the United States was satisfactory. He was a successful ambassador and a qualified spokesperson, but unfortunately, he was not a competent foreign minister to handle the complicated geopolitical situations nowadays. The Peter Principle points out that every employee tends to rise to their level of incompetence in a hierarchy. The Chinese government is a hierarchy, and Mr. Qin Gang is the employee who rose to his incompetence level in December 2022, when he was promoted to lead the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry. Compared with his predecessor, Wang Yi, who is China's foreign minister again, Qin Gang is more tactical than strategic. His alleged affairs with the former presenter and producer of the television program, Talk with World Leaders, is not worth mentioning. It is not the main reason why he disappeared. The primary reason for his being sacked is his work orientation, which focused more on improving the relationship between the US and China instead of strengthening the ties between Beijing and Moscow. China is forced to join hands with Russia, and it knows that Washington will not allow China to overtake the United States, no matter how softly or obediently Beijing behaves. Especially when US politicians want to make Taiwan another Ukraine in Asia, Beijing has no choice but to reinforce its cooperation with Moscow. Qin Gang's removal from office shows China's decision to stay away from the US and closer to Russia. Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Russia early this year but intended to avoid meeting Biden in Beijing or Washington. According to the Russian news agency TASS, Russian presidential assistant Yuri Ushakov said that Putin had received China's invitation to visit China in October 2023 to attend the Third Belt and Road Initiative International Cooperation Summit. Two world leaders rarely visit each other within a year, but national leaders in China and Russia set a precedent. Moscow and Beijing have never been so close to each other. After the Ukraine war broke out, China initially maintained close economic relations with Russia but tried to avoid Russia politically and militarily. Still, the West, headed by the US, keeps relating China with Russia, hoping to isolate Beijing. It also uses Taiwan as a weapon to provoke China mainland, expecting Chinese President Xi Jinping will follow Putin's suit to recover Taiwan by force. Taiwan is China's core interest, so Beijing will resort to military means if necessary, and the United States knows it. Recently, a rumor goes that Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a 3-hour speech in Suzhou, preparing the Chinese army for a future war. In a video uploaded in late 2021, we said that Chinese President Xi Jinping would solve the Taiwan issue permanently during his third or fourth term, and today we can say the day is close. If Beijing has to unite with Taiwan militarily, it needs Moscow at its back. China needs Russia to counter the pressure from the US and its allies, and Moscow also needs Beijing to break diplomatic isolation. Not long ago, a so-called mutual agreement between South Africa and Russia told the world that Putin would not attend the BRICS summit in South Africa. Instead, the Russian foreign minister would represent him. However, Moscow confirmed that Putin would participate in important talks at the summit remotely. Suppose Putin ignores the ICC warrant and shows up in South Africa to attend the summit in person. In that case, he will put South Africa in trouble. For this reason, Putin chose to attend the BRICS summit online. For Russia, it means that the diplomatic isolation of Russia by Europe and the United States has been further strengthened. China is not South Africa and does not care what the West thinks. The Russian president's planned visit to China in October 2023 is significant, meaning the world's second and third military powers are joining hands to counterattack America's pressure. From the geopolitical point of view, Washington's relentless suppression of China and Russia in Europe and Asia, respectively, has set the world on fire. In Europe, the Ukraine conflict faces another escalation. NATO has claimed that it has mobilized 300,000 troops in Eastern Europe, and Ukraine not only fights Russians on its soil, but it also begins attacking Russia's land with drones. Against this backdrop, the risk of a direct conflict between the two military blocs, Russia and NATO, has increased dramatically. NATO will soon find itself in a dilemma if Wagner in Belarus provokes or assaults Poland and Lithuania. In mid-July, Russia's Duma announced that Lithuania's independence from the former Soviet Union was illegal, still regarding it as a part of Russia. How will NATO respond if Russia takes over Lithuania? Britain, France, the US and other Western nations did nothing when Germany assaulted Poland in the late 1930s, and history repeats itself. Even if NATO wants to protect Lithuania, it has to prepare itself for a nuclear war with Russia when Moscow realizes a world without Russia is meaningless. Looking back 10 or 20 years later, we may find the Ukraine war as part of the Third World War, just like Japan invaded China in 1931, starting World War II. Hopefully, it will not come true, as the Third World War might bring the human race back to the Stone Age. The atomic bombs dropped on Japan at the end of the Second World War already demonstrated nuclear weapons' devastating power. Today's Russia possesses thousands of more destructive nuke warheads than those dropped on Japan by the US in the 1940s, and more horrifying is that Russian President Putin is ready to press the nuclear button whenever he feels necessary. That is why the US is unwilling to have a direct war with Russia, and pushing Ukraine to have a proxy war with Moscow instead, although Joe Biden says Russia has nothing but nuclear weapons, land and oil. We do not judge NATO or Russia here for the reason of the Ukraine war, but we have to say that Russia is not fighting with Ukraine but with NATO. Neither Russia nor Ukraine has won the war, and both sides have recorded huge losses. Because of the war, the West imposed thousands of sanctions on Russia and isolated Russia diplomatically. Russia needs China to sustain itself, and China also needs Russia at the same time. Like Europe, Asia is also at stake. The US has dozens of military bases near China, provoking it in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and even the Korean Peninsula. The US has sent its most advanced Ohio-class strategic nuclear submarine to South Korea for the first time in its Pusan port. The Korean Peninsula has been pushed back to the edge of the war. In 2021, we published a series of videos, China Will Win, and explained why the US cannot defeat China in the West Pacific. And America's think tanks and the US military also did many rounds of war games, proving the US does not have the absolute strength to win. The US may not launch a war with China or Russia directly in Europe or Asia. Still, it will seriously threaten their security if war breaks out on their doorstep for China and Russia, whether in East Europe, Korea, or the Taiwan Strait. The United States wants to hold China and Russia in check. In this context, Putin's visit to China in October 2023 will tell the world that China and Russia's strategic partnership is not merely on paper. From China's point of view, although the United States has shown a willingness to ease the freezing relations with China, and also release signals to the outside world that they are willing to establish a stable relationship with Beijing, the United States is still taking a variety of provocative actions, including sanctions against China, tech wars, and selling over $300 million of weapons to Taiwan. Beijing does not trust Washington and understands the US government has never given up its long-term suppression and containment strategy to strangulate China. China has its plan and has decided to achieve its goal by following a different road from the United States. It had been at the top of the world for thousands of years before the 1830s. After 2 centuries of humiliation, it wants to realize national rejuvenation. China must establish a new international order that breaks away from the US hegemonic system. Based on this, the Belt and Road Initiative has long gone beyond the meaning of economic cooperation, and has become a banner for developing countries around the world to break through US hegemony. It is particularly significant to Russia during the Ukraine war when the West has sanctioned Moscow thousands of times. Putin needs Beijing's political, economic and diplomatic support, and is eager to visit China. China also needs Putin's endorsement when facing pressures from the US and its allies in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. Suppose Chinese President Xi Jinping has to take over Taiwan by force soon. In that case, he needs Putin's help to deter NATO in Europe and hamper Japan in East Asia while Pyongyang is ready to handle South Korea. 1 year ago, we mentioned in a video that China, Russia, and the US were like the three warring states in China's Three Kingdoms era around 1800 years ago. Currently, China and Russia, like Wu and Shu Han, have to stay together to counterbalance the pressure from the United States, which is like Wei, the most potent state in those days. China's former foreign minister, Qin Gang, did a lot to entertain the United States, but he needed to pay more attention to maintaining a close relationship with Russia. His removal from office means that China stays closer to Russia and farther away from the United States, which the Chinese government will never tell the world. China and Russia need each other, but they are not brothers or friends. Once China becomes the most powerful nation in the world 1 or 2 decades later, Russia and the US may join hands to offset China's influence. China is not belligerent and will not threaten anyone, but some countries do not think so. In the West, China is regarded as a lion, and the lion is awake. Even if this lion is the most lovely one, people on the street still want to put it in a cage, which is what the US and its allies are doing now.